지금부터 이번 2014 대전 세계 혁신 포럼 그리고 제4회 이노비즈 글로벌 포럼의 마지막 플래너리 세션인 플래너리 세션 4를 시작하도록 하겠습니다.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin the Plenary Session 4, the last plenary session of 2014 Daejeon Global Innovation Forum.
본 세션은 2명의 공동 연사의 기조 강연과 4개의 패널 강연으로 이루어져 있습니다. 모든 강연이 끝난 후 공동 질의응답 및 토론 시간을 가질 예정입니다.
This session will have one keynote speech of 2 speakers, followed by 4 panel speeches. After finishing all the speeches, we will have the time for the discussion and Q&A at the end of this session.
본 세션의 좌장은 충남대학교 부총장이시자 세계과학도시연합의 사무총장을 맡고 계신 오덕성 교수님이십니다.
And now we will present our moderator, Professor Deog-Seong, the Secretary General of World Technopolis Association and Vice President of Chungnam National University in the Republic of Korea.
그리고 오덕성 교수님께서는 한국 뉴욕 주립대학교 기술경영학과장이신 프레드 영 필립스 교수님과 함께 기조 강연을 진행하시겠습니다.
Professor Oh will also deliver the keynote speech for Plenary Session 4 with Professor Fred Young Phillips, the Department Chair of Technology and Society at State University of New York, Korea.
본 세션의 좌장이신 오덕성 교수님과 공동 기조 강연을 맡아주신 프레드 영 필립스 교수님을 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome them with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon. Yesterday I did the same job as the moderators, but I did not a good job in terms of moderator job. It's because we got the 2 hours for the presentation, then I gave 20 minutes for the keynote speech and 10 minutes for the panelists, but nobody keep it. Although we showed the timers there, but all the panelists and the speaker neglected. Today, as a speaker and as a moderator, I will do. So we, the Fred Young Phillips and I will do our presentation on 20 minutes. Then I will give each panel 10 to 15 minutes. Then we can have 30 minutes for the Q&A. If you go a little longer, I will stop your microphone. That is my power. Agree with me? Okay, thank you. Before our presentation, I will introduce you the whole speakers on the panel and the keynote as well. We have already introduced the Professor Fred Young Phillips from New York State University, Stony Brook. One more big hand for him. And then as a first panelist, I will introduce you Desai Narasimhalu from Singapore. And then from Silicon Valley, we invite Professor Tae-ho from San Jose State University in the United States. And from Germany, we invite Professor Juergen Pietsch, HafenCity University in Hamburg, Germany. And from Taiwan, one of the 4 dragons, I will introduce Professor Charles Rin from National Chao-Tung University in Taiwan. And also the Professor Lin did his job as a vice mayor of Tainan City. So he has a balanced opinion about the innovation policy. For the keynote speech, I and Professor Phillips did a corporate job. So we finished 15 pages of paper, but actually we shared each 10 minutes, but it's too hurry. So I will give the first chance for Professor Phillips to go from the beginning to the conclusion. If we some minutes left, I will follow him. That is my suggestion. Please, it's your time.
Thank you, Dr. Oh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates. We've heard the word ecosystem used quite a lot this week. We've heard and we've seen the word in many of the papers that are in the conference book. At the end, we've wondered why, and is it whether the innovation ecosystem idea is one that we can use as a practical tool. At the end of the last session, a gentleman from Nigeria stood up, he was a biologist, and asked, "This is not like a natural ecosystem, is it?" And I was happy to hear that question. Thank you, sir, if you're out there, because that's exactly what we've been thinking about in this paper. For some years now, we've lived happily enough with the ideas of national innovation systems and regional innovation systems. Do we really gain anything by adding eco to the front of that? Well, we'll explore some of the ideas surrounding that question and look at some examples from Korea and elsewhere, and we'll see where it takes us. That didn't work, did it? Can someone help with the slide? That it's there, but it's not here.
I see. Okay. Oh, not here. It is. Okay.
Thanks.
Put this green.
The green one. Okay, now we're good. Here is one definition of innovation ecosystem that's a pretty good one. The complex relationships formed between actors whose functional goal is to enable technology development and innovation. And in this definition, the actors are infrastructure, resources, and human capital. And the other entities, of course, are institutions, business firms, and so on. As I say, a pretty good definition. It doesn't say what kinds of interactions and relationships are between the actors, and it doesn't say where it occurs. It doesn't mention local, regional, national, or global. Now we have the ideas of technopolis and the ideas of cluster already very well defined. So again, our mission here is to explore what the idea of innovation ecosystems adds to what we've known before. This is a picture from Accenture of the Silicon Valley innovation ecosystem. It's very fanciful. It's not intended to be scientific. And indeed, we're going to see that most of the published work that mentions innovation ecosystems is published by the private sector and not in peer-reviewed journals. And we'll explore the implications of that as well. The second thing to notice about this diagram is that it definitely does suggest a parallel with natural systems, because you see the trees, the waterfalls, and whatnot. What is the difference? What can we get from the ecosystem idea that was not present or not very clear from the technopolis or the industry cluster idea? And as we read the literature, the published work, I should say, 6 things jumped out. One is that it's a continuation of systemic thinking. It's good to see that in the private sector. It hasn't been very common before. It takes the idea of Everett Rogers about innovation happening inside a social system and pushes it forward. We found a citation of Moore in the 1990s, who was the first to use the ecological analogy. But the ecosystem idea does show a great appreciation for the connections and the interactions among the innovation actors. The second distinguishing factor is the emphasis on digitalization and the way in which ICT, information and communication technologies ties together all the actors in the system. The third is the open innovation concept. Okay, this invites systemic thinking. It's, in a way, the open innovation is a precursor to the innovation ecosystem concept because we have the interaction of many sources of innovation. Then there's the attractive quality of the term itself. It appeals to journalists. It appeals to business people. It's nice to say it. It's helped the idea catch on. I think that the idea pushes to a new level of thinking, the idea of differentiated roles for the actors. In the Technopolis discussions, we always have emphasized in a vague sort of way that it takes a village to raise an entrepreneur, or that all segments of society have to pull together. And that's very nice, but it doesn't say specifically who does what. And I think that what we see in the published work on innovation ecosystems does provide more detail in that area. Finally, we see more emphasis on market forces. Perhaps not surprising, because most of what's been published that uses the phrase innovation ecosystem does come from the private sector. To understand the structure of an innovation ecosystem, one might start with the model that I and others have showed many times that came from the IC Square Institute at the University of Texas. And in this model, we see entrepreneurial talent and new technologies, investment capital, and business knowledge being brought together by a consortium of academics, industry people, and government to grow in a nurturing community to find export markets and growth opportunities. If you take that diagram and add the Technopolis wheel of Dave Gibson that Deog-Seong and I have showed you many times also, it begins to flesh out what are the roles and contributory functions of the many actors. And then we drill down and find more detail, as this reference shows, on exactly what university activities contribute to this system. And then, because most ecosystem ideas have been put forth in the context of the startup ecosystem or the entrepreneurial ecosystem, we're really talking about something broader for innovation ecosystem that includes companies of all sizes. So then we add in the roles of the SMEs and the large companies and the multinationals in that step. And then finally, the contributions of the influencers, the facilitators, the godfathers, and the roles of precursors and collaborators that we've talked about in this conference. And mix them all together, and that's the recipe for an innovation ecosystem. It's very complicated. If we tried to draw a diagram, it would be too many things and invisible on the screen. But here's a simplified view from Morrison, and it shows what some of the interactions are between the actors and between the elements of the system. And as we look at examples from international, we'll see that having the elements, having all the actors is one thing, and establishing the relationships between the actors is something else. And some countries have one but not the other. As we're looking for a reasonable definition of innovation ecosystem, well, it's hard because we see that phrase occurring in many different contexts. A corporate context, we see corporate innovation ecosystems, regional innovation ecosystems, digital IEs, city-based IEs, often innovation districts and so on, high-tech, small, medium enterprise IEs, very local ones like individual accelerators and incubators will talk about the ecosystems they're creating. And finally, university-based innovation ecosystems. And we see just a few of those. Here are some examples from Spain and from Russia. And they're still trying, but that is definitely a counterpoint to the trend we notice in most of this coming from the private sector. And actually in Korea, we see still another context, which is national innovation ecosystem. And when we look for evidence of the success factors of innovation ecosystems, it turns out to be pretty much the same list that we considered to be success factors for Technopolis initiatives. One difference is highlighted at the bottom of this slide, and that is that the success prerequisites are not the same as the success metrics, because now we have a complex system, or a complex ecosystem, if you will, and a great many different constituent groups. And each constituent group wants something different from the system. So very hard to settle on a performance metric for the system. Some constituents will want more jobs, and some will want more wealth, and some will want more companies, and some will want more highways, and it becomes a multiple constituent dialogue problem to figure out how to decide whether the ecosystem is performing to the desired levels or not. And as a result of the complex system nature, as we talk about some more international comparisons here, in the United States, the National Science Foundation is saying that to deal with these multi-sectoral and multi-technology complexities, engineering education has to change, that we have to turn out what NSF rather charmingly is calling holistic engineers. The American initiatives and the Chinese initiatives are also both focusing on the famous Valley of Death and the entrepreneurial process. Some countries are innovating on the relationships side. Remember, I said you need the actors and you need the relationships among actors. An example jumped out in Malaysia where they take the old American agricultural extension model. I will hurry up, thank you. And instead of sending innovations out from the government to the provinces, they go find innovation in the provinces and bring it back. And in Iran, we're seeing that they have generated pretty much all the actors by now, but my colleagues from Iran tell me that the connections between the actors is still a weakness. So it turns out that just having a strength in R&D or a strength in finance is not enough anymore. Another thing we get from the innovation ecosystem concept is that a more balanced collection of actors is needed. And as a result, Shanghai is overtaking Silicon Valley as an innovation center, says Forbes magazine. And ZDNet tells us that Munich is edging out London because they have more balanced systems, and just money and just brains are not enough. Let me skip this part. Some examples from Korea. The number of startup companies has grown to 35,000 in recent years, and the Korean policy has concentrated on eliminating the barriers to entrepreneurship and encouraging ways for the sources of new ideas to be connected with the supporting mechanisms. 10 companies in Korea have reached what they call the Unicorn Club with over $1 billion in public and private investment. VentureBeat says that Korea is a powerhouse in hardware for ICT and great potential in software. And we've come to realize that Korea really does have quite a long way to go in building a role for software and respected jobs for software engineers. There's been a great growth in the number of student-run entrepreneurship clubs in Korea, many of them because the recession in the economy has caused a shortage of jobs, and students are turning to entrepreneurship. And this is happening especially at Seoul National University, at KAIST, and at Posttech. The government initiatives in Korea include the LINK program, which emphasizes technology transfer and design, the Startup Leading University program, which focuses on SMEs, and the Annapolis Foundation Campus Business program, which encourages industry and university collaboration. In mapping, Korea tries to get accelerators or ecosystems of one sort or another in every province. The Small and Medium Business Administration has funded 6 universities for these entrepreneurship development centers that develop special curriculum. The incubation concept has been broken down analytically to figure out what services should be offered to companies at what stages. And again, linking the sources of innovation with the support mechanisms, we have the universities and the research institutes and the business community contributing ideas of technologies with commercial potential, and then both new companies, relocated companies, and existing indigenous companies can develop these ideas in the Science and Technology Park. Here the Korean government tries for a national ecosystem to bring ideas all the way from the creative stage to the startup stage. This initiative tries to reform all the regulations in Korea that might hinder entrepreneurship. So this is a national initiative. Korea is very close to getting a good balance here of services that support the startup companies in all phases, from pre-startup all the way to maturity. There are entrepreneurship fairs, startup auditions, pitch contests. Big ones have been held in Seoul and in Ilsan to find and to showcase the most promising entrepreneurs. Okay? And when we map the programs against the goals of connecting the sources of ideas with the support mechanisms, we see very good coverage. And another map showing pretty much the same thing. So the government's goal is not to control every aspect of this, and that's an important point, but the word they use is activate. The government wants to activate the connections between the sources of ideas and the support mechanisms. So that's the quick profile of Korean ecosystem, and it's got the actors, it's got the connections. I wonder sometimes whether the fast rate of growth of this country has produced so many government programs that there's perhaps not enough crosstalk, and that there's maybe duplication, of course, which is not necessarily harmful, but maybe they're not all talking with each other because there's simply so many of them. Okay, I've mentioned that most of the published material comes from the private sector, and implies in a way that, and this is probably of concern to us because we're from government and university, that the authors of these pieces that emphasize innovation ecosystem is trying to take the initiative away from government and away from universities and privatize the Technopolis movement. And if this is true, then it's really, the innovation ecosystem idea is really at odds with cluster and Technopolis theories. Raises the questions of can the innovation ecosystem idea really serve the public interest, and can innovation really happen in a private sector-driven ecosystem? A private sector-driven ecosystem becomes just subsumed under a company's supply chain management. And supply chain managers are good at squeezing costs, but not very good at coming up with radical innovation. Then we come to the final question that we probably won't have time to deal with, and that is the analogy to natural ecosystems a good one? And again, people seem enchanted by the idea and draw these leafy diagrams that suggest that it is. Actually, it's not a very good analogy. What's good about the idea of innovation ecosystems, in our view, is that it's a good motivational phrase. It's motivated a lot of successful projects in South Korea and elsewhere around the world. It encourages system thinking. It's provided a framework for sharpening some of our ideas that we've had in Technopolis and cluster discussions. And it's resulted in a lot of good press coverage for our efforts because the phrase ecosystem is so attractive to the journalists. What's not right about it? Well, the analogy to natural ecosystems is flawed, and we don't have time to go into the details. And if an innovation ecosystem is business-driven only, then that seems to run contrary to the open innovation philosophy, which leaves the system open to innovation from any source. As I say, we don't have metrics. The implication that the innovation ecosystem as a complex system demonstrates emergent behavior and tipping points and all this, completely unfounded in science and yet to be investigated. And we see the term in so many contexts that a good definition doesn't seem really possible. So in sum, we quote this anonymous economist who said, well, that's fine in practice, but you know, it would never work in theory. And that, in a way, describes the innovation ecosystem idea. Did we write a long paper just to expose innovation ecosystem as an empty buzzword? No, not at all. As I've said, it's been a very useful idea, and there is scope for extending research. There are quasi-evolution theories, and for those of you who are interested in mathematical ecology and so on, there is scope, and we'll hope to do this in a future research, to take a subset of the postulates of biological ecology and see whether we can model this in a way that will extend the cluster theory and be of practical use for Technopolis builders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. As you see in the presentation, the Fred Young Phillips have an overview on the previous innovation ecosystem theories and some the trend as a whole. Then I did in-depth analysis of ecosystem building in South Korea, particularly based on the startup and venture activities from the University and Research Institute. Then I showed the development model as a whole, and he did some recommendation after reviewing these theories and the real practices. But we have already 3 minutes past, so I will skip my presentation, and I will invite Dr. Narasimhalu for his presentation. 10 minutes, don't forget it.
Okay, very good afternoon. Today, what I would share with you is the innovation ecosystem building experience that Singapore went through. Singapore will be celebrating 50 years of independence next year. and I've been living there for 30 years. I've seen action both inside and outside of the policy making, so I hope that I'll be able to give you a reasonably accurate version of what I observe. I'm going to use the Kouga model that I shared with you about 2 years ago, where the actors are companies, universities, angels, and venture capitalists, research labs, and government. I'll walk you through how each of these actors had contributed. And to begin with, there was only G. G doesn't stand for God, G stands for government. Yeah? And of course, it was not just the government, it was a government and a fishing village. That was 50 years ago. And so the government said, in order for us to make any kind of progress, we have to get to the next stage, which is really establish universities. There was one university called National University of Singapore already. So they said we need to convert the university from not only being a teaching university, we need to move it to a research university. In addition to transforming a university from a teaching to a research university, they also made sure that they created other universities, such as the Nanyang Technological University, which was the second one to be done, and then much later, the Singapore Management University, to which I belong. And then, having done that, they actually seduced the companies to come, because they said, it's very critical for us, if you want to develop our economy, we need to create jobs. So they put up policies which encourage companies to come in and create jobs. And this is through giving them tax holidays and whatever other policies that are required to convince them to relocate, because Singapore was at that time able to offer low cost of doing business, and they could only offer semi-skilled or unskilled labor, so manufacturing was a choice. And that gives you some timeline. Since my time was cut from 15 to 10 minutes, I'm just going to let you read it in the paper rather than go through it. Yeah? So those are the early days. And you find essentially the Economic Development Board was the driver at that time, and they really wanted to make sure foreign investors came to Singapore. There was sufficient foreign direct investment. Job creation was a primary responsibility. Once that happened, then they said, let's build some technology parks, science and technology parks, because when these large companies come here, they have to be located somewhere, and it's much better to locate them next to the universities so that they can interact with the universities. At the same time, they also had something called Local Industry Update Program, where they would take local companies and ask them to partner with these multinationals so that there can be some transfer of knowledge, and wherever the multinational required some low-cost solutions, then the local companies can offer that to them. So that was the next step, really, building science and technology parks. Again, some details, which I will leave it to you to read from the paper. This was very critical in 1991. They set up National Science and Technology Park. They said, having done this, we have to go to the next step, which is we need to create applied research labs. Labs that will take whatever has been done in some university around the world and bring it closer to the market. And with this, they set up a fairly significant body called National Science and Technology Board. A lot of interesting institutes were set up. I was part of one of such institute. And you find you find especially they set up even as early as 1985 to 90 period, 1988, Biotechnology Committee to spearhead venture into biotechnology, which later resulted in attracting pharmaceutical companies to come into Singapore in the late 90s. So research labs was very critical in order to fill this ecosystem, because they would give very well-trained applied research scientists who can then contribute to new product development as well as startups. I recall one of my own labs where we used about 17 of our innovations to spin out 21 companies, and we raised about $70 million to create startups. And one of our companies was listed as the coolest company at that time by Forbes and other business magazines. So it was very critical to establish the research labs as the next step after setting up the Science and Technology Park. And finally, when they did that, they created the NSTB was very quickly transitioned to another entity. This time they said, these are all independent labs, they're not working well with each other. Let's try to create clusters. So, and they created two different clusters. One was called Biomedical Research Council, and the other one was called Science and Engineering Research Councils. under what was known as Agency for Science, Technology and Research, or ASTAR. And I give you a list of these research institutes under each of these councils. The Biomedical Research Council, you can see, they were looking at a number of things, such as the Bioinformatics Institute, which is really the cross-section of biology and computer science, Bioprocessing Technology Institute, Imaging Research Institute, as well as things like graduate medical school, which really help prepare people to become clinical scientists, not just doctors, but clinical scientists. They try to address different parts of the puzzle, so to say. This then resulted in the whole range of activities, and essentially they wanted to continue to increase the number of the amount of investment into R&D to about 3.5% of the GDP by 2015. That is the plan, and they're pretty close to it. Right now it's around 3%. Finally, what is missing was the investment community. There were a lot of fragmented investors. They tried to bring them all together under a very interesting plan. They set up something called National Framework for Innovation and Enterprise. And if you look at from your left, they even funded universities to create innovation and entrepreneurial culture on the campus. I myself received about $6.5 million for a 5-year period. The objective was really to get people excited about creating innovations and get them excited about starting up companies. And they set up something called proof of concept grants. If you have a great idea that you have created as a proof of principle, they would fund up to $250,000 to take it to the next stage, where you can take a technology and try to find the right application for it. And once you have done that, they funded technology incubators. These technology incubators, if they invest 15 cents, the government would invest 85 cents, up to $500,000. So people who have translated something from proof of principle to proof of concept now can use the grants, investments through the technology incubators to pretty much do a proof of value, build out a product, take it out, and test it with the early adopters. They even set up a disruptive innovation incubator. They attracted serial entrepreneurs to come and settle down in Singapore. In terms of technology transfer, where they felt the universities did not have whatever it takes to translate the idea into product, they got them to work with polytechnics. And they also gave companies, small and medium enterprises, innovation vouchers so that they could engage university staff and faculty as well as students and research students to find solutions for the problems. So these are some examples that they went about creating around 2004 or 5. And you find once they decided that the amount of money they invested for a 5 or 6 year period is non-trivial for a population of 5.47 million people. And some of them were investment into upstream research, some of them were into balanced upstream and midstream, and some of them were downstream. It's really trying to find the right mechanisms for funding different parts of the value chain. They even set up a very interesting program where they will allow for both top-down programs as well as bottom-up programs. They identified 3 areas, said interactive digital media, second was healthcare, third was clean systems, and these are the top ones. And from time to time, they would also issue national innovation challenges. And at the same time, they allowed for people to come up with their own individual ideas through a competitive research program funding, and also allowed universities to establish linkages with the companies through what's known as research centers of excellence. Ravi talked yesterday about how NTU was working with industries, and that is funded through some of these programs. Finally, they also wanted to make sure that they're able to internationalize innovation. Rather than trying to go out and work with people outside Singapore, they try to bring people from outside Singapore into Singapore so that they can collaborate and work together along the open innovation concept. In this context, I'm listing 10 major projects that they launched, and it involves people from different parts of the world, from Germany, from Switzerland, from US, as well as from Israel. So number of countries. So this, I believe, collocating all these entities into one common place was what I would call Innovation Cluster 4.0, and they have been doing it over the last 2 years. And in this context, they're ready to launch something called, it's called the Launchpad, and that will come into play 2015, where they will put the research labs, the clusters, investors, startup companies, all in the same vicinity, so there is greater interaction. So this is something that they are extremely focused on. So what can be the next one? What will be Innovation Cluster 5.0? In my opinion, I want to bring it back to what I did some time ago, 2 days ago. I believe the next step for Singapore is to really look at, trying to address the valley of death. They're creating a lot of upstream information, so how to bring it downstream is a major challenge that they will feel. Okay, they've been addressing. If you see, it started as a fishing village. In about 50 years, they have now moved the economy so that the per capita GDP is about 50,000 US dollars. It's about third or fourth in the world, depending on how you rank it. The whole idea is how can they maintain this standard of living, as well as how can they advance it to the next stage. This is something that policymakers are looking at, and if you have any ideas, I'm happy to communicate those ideas to them. I know I exceeded by about 2 minutes, but I suppose that's okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And in particular, the Professor Narasimhalu has a very serious job on this the spin-out or startups or some innovative idea realization. His research institute, innovation, the entrepreneurship development, has a very serious job to facilitate the young startups to challenge for the new market. I was told when I visit Singapore, he and his colleague told me before the student graduate from their university, they could have a 2 chance to get the money just with the startup ideas, just it. Then the government via the university, they gave a couple of $1,000. Then within the time of education, they have a 2 chance to challenge the venture incubation. If it's successful, not successful, it doesn't matter. But that is the experience. That is very motivative. He's the very person to support it. Give a big hand again for Dr. Narasimhalu. Then the Professor Tae-ho Park from San Jose State University will give the example on Silicon Valley, what happened there. Also 10 minutes, you can check the time here.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Today I will present the innovation ecosystem in Silicon Valley to you. First of all, I will introduce you to Silicon Valley, and then I will present the fundamentals of making today's Silicon Valley so successful. So as you can see in this map, the Silicon Valley is located in the west coast of United States, and then the San Francisco, San Jose, all those are in Silicon Valley nowadays. And then as you can see in this map, a lot of companies in Silicon Valley, many well-known companies in Silicon Valley, HP, eBay, Google, the Facebook, well-known companies in Silicon Valley. That makes Silicon Valley so strong. So many countries try to help their SMEs, small to medium enterprise companies, to globalize and then also successful grow in industry. But the large company, well-known company in the world, also a big initiative or driver for the economic growth. And then, as you can see on this chart, there is a 5 generation in innovation evolution in Silicon Valley. It started from 1940s, 50s. The first generation of innovation stemmed from the defense industry. So the government support for the defense industry helped Silicon Valley grew at the beginning. And then the IC technology created in Silicon Valley, that's another momentum for the technology innovation in the Silicon Valley. And then computer technology came out 1980s and then 1990s also. So Apple and then the HP, Silicon Graphics, those companies led the innovation in Silicon Valley. And then the internet and communication technology developed 1990s. That really drove Silicon Valley innovation in the world. So at the time, Yahoo and then Netscape, Google, all those companies emerged in the Silicon Valley ecosystem. And then nowadays, the 5th generation, the mobile and then cloud computing technology, all those, so social media. So those are nowadays some big driving force of innovation in Silicon Valley. So the technology innovation, the innovation of the ecosystem, that takes some time, quite a bit time, as you can see. Not just the 1 or 2 years matter, and not just the one decade, the 10 years, 20 years. In the previous presentation, Singapore, the innovation evolution took 30 years, 40 years. This Silicon Valley ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem, took much more time than that. So the government support eventually should sustain in this innovation system. And then this slide shows you the innovation jobs in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. So as you can see, a lot of innovation jobs are available in the Bay Area. Even today, nowadays, the more innovation jobs created. So that's a real power of innovation. Later on, I will discuss the fundamentals of making Silicon Valley so successful. One of them is manpower, especially intelligent manpower. So Silicon Valley has that very important factor. And then Silicon Valley is not just the IT-based innovation area. It has many different technology innovation there. The biotech and then the nanotech, also the hardware. When you say the IT, that's most likely you mean the software. So the Silicon Valley is not just the software-based innovation, the hardware also. It started from hardware innovation. And then now it's a mixture of hardware and software innovation. And then this one shows you the venture capital in Silicon Valley. So to make the innovation, the ecosystem so successfully, you need money actually. So Silicon Valley has that one. 40% of U.S. capital invested in Silicon Valley. And then this one shows you that the Silicon Valley innovation ecosystem is growing. The 2008, as you know, the U.S. faced a financial crisis. At the time, the investment in technology, the startups dropped down dramatically. However, it quickly recovered. So it grew at a very fast pace rate. And then this one shows you some information in the Silicon Valley ecosystem. So the population is about 3 million, and then the more than 22,000 startups there, and then as you can see here, the 45% of startups could not stay in the industry for 2 years. So they emerged and then disappeared. So that's why the people in the Silicon Valley, the techs in Silicon Valley, they see merging of new startups and then they disappear. So there's just try and error, also some experience on learning a business. So, and then the 1 or 2 or some the success companies emerged, like the Google. And then this one shows you some of fundamentals for the Silicon Valley ecosystem. People, definitely you need intelligent people to drive innovation. And then also their network connection, that's also very important, sharing the ideas. And then the venture capital must be there. Without venture capital, the funding, you cannot expect the companies to grow. But Silicon Valley has it. And then infrastructure also. The well-known universities such as Stanford and then the Berkeley, all those universities there, and then supplying manpower, and then the creative energy. So people's, the creative mind, mental must be there. And then also another important thing is the weather. You have to have a good living environment. And then this one shows you there's 2 things: the innovation and then entrepreneurship. You should have a chain. There should be chain effect from innovation, and then entrepreneurship should commercialize the created technology, and then make it successful in the market, and then that generate the money, right? And then that generate the jobs. So it should be a chain effect. And then the ecosystem should include many factors such as investors and the mentors, the accelerators, incubators. Silicon Valley has it. And then this one shows you triple helix. So the 3 entities should work together. Otherwise, you cannot see a so successful Silicon Valley. And then these are some questions we can discuss during a panel. Thank you.
Professor Park talked about the status in Silicon Valley together with the triple helix model and ecosystem building. Thank you. And then Professor Juergen Pietsch from Hamburg, Germany, will have a speech on the smart green city approach in terms of ecosystem building. Professor Juergen Pietsch has some corporate project with green businesses in Germany, so he can talk about his experience as well.
안녕하세요. Transformations towards smart green city explained by change management, by ecosystem building. In the example of the process of a fossil industrial district in the south of the city of Hamburg. We have, before looking for smart or green cities, okay, thank you. We have to look for upcoming global urban development. On the one hand, the world's growing cities can easily become chaotic and disordered places which contribute further to climate change and social inequality. On the other hand, having many people living closely together in a city may have certain benefits. So we have to look what we understand about smart green cities and also ecosystem buildings. At the moment, there are different smart green city driving forces. Urbanization of mankind, Internet of Things, carrying capacity and consumption of resources, and also sustainability, but at last. Smart green cities are not simply a new label for better cities. Smart green cities will be a result of a new type of understanding and developing cities based on different starting situations. But urban evolution agenda towards smart green cities is mainly focused by more and wealthy inhabitants in rising cities, mobilizing human intelligence as well as artificial intelligence. But there are 5 top trends for city of the future: careful resource management, citizens and municipalities cultivate love for their city, do-it-yourself is a motto of the city of the future, citizens will become environmental aware mobility managers, and information and communication technologies open up the smart city of the future. We have to see that the global urban population will grow from 3.5 billion to 5 billion within the next 2 decades. This rapid increase in population, coupled with financial constraints and a desire to reduce environmental impact, is creating new challenges for cities in areas such as energy use, mobility, security, and governance. In 30 years, as much people live in cities than now on the whole earth. About 300 million Chinese people, which will move from the country into cities within the next 10 years, will also move their demands for living and consumption. In the next 20 years, worldwide, over 3 billion new middle-class consumers will be seeking energy, water, land and materials such as steel, putting an additional strain of these already tight resources. The growing demographic, economic, social, environmental importance of the world's cities creates both challenges and opportunities. But hyper-sustainable solutions development for Korean, German or Japan cities cannot compensate for the new resource requirements in China, India or Africa. Sustainable development for more than 50 million people in the Pearl River Delta will certainly differ from nice solutions for 20,000 small transition towns in old Europe. So in each project like Smart Green Harburg, we have to be much more better than the global average. There are some development stage of our testbed beginning from the 1970s. These are in something quite similar to the story of Manchester we have heard in the morning. The Internet of Things and urban development. Sustainability touches on nearly every aspect of daily living, from the state of our food supply, the quality of our public transportation, roads, energy use, or buildings. And so we have also to look for sustainable innovation ecosystem. Not every ecosystem will be sustainable. We have heard something about innovations and their driving forces, so I can go to the next one. So I have to make some remarks about generations, about value adding and also industry. In Germany, we have the idea of the industry 4.0, and this will show us that the industry will change in a lot of fields, and also it will change in the kind of working. The Internet of Things is a real part of innovation ecosystems. But we are not only confronted with new types of industry, but also we have to develop new types of urban planning and knowledge base for land use. New industry structures will create also new types of housing and living. And therefore we need new type of planning paradigm. Our solution is we have to transform the ecosystem thinking in urban planning and research. Therefore, all kinds of the development of new industry, Internet of Things, or innovation ecosystems will be part of our city development. And intelligent ecosystems will be an essential part of sustainable urban cultivation. Energy and food production will lead to new water and open space concepts in urban areas. Thinking in life cycles of buildings, infrastructures, and technologies will at best lead to a mosaic cycle culture to manage urban resource fields in different stages of development, which allow continuous improvement processes. So the mosaic cycle concept is based on life cycle of buildings, and there's a part of ecosystems in urban land use patches, ecosystems of technological processing, innovation ecosystems, and also ecosystems of urban development and planning. We have to create a research ecosystem for sustainable urban development, for cultivating urban development. So, smart cities will not automatically become green cities. There's a long way from our urban roots to smart green cities. We need a city metaphor not as a machine, but as an ecosystem. And so in the new paradigm, as example, we tested in the Harburg area with some aspects like Channel Harburg and Airbus Industries and Innovation Campus for Green Technologies, the Deog-Technology company, and but there's plenty to do towards Innovation 5.0. Thank you very much.
The Professor Pietsch gave another approach of smart green businesses in accordance with the development of next generation industry. He talked about the first generation that is matched with climate change. Climate change gave us some new idea in terms of the industry. So he called it smart industry, including the renewable energy, new energy system, smart and ubiquitous structure to support it at one end. At the other hand, he was talking about the urban development strategy to contain the new way of approach, to contain also the new business of high-tech, followed to the new next generation of industry. So it's another way of think, where to go, what is the niche market to match with climate change. Thank you. Then you can have some the other question in the floor afterwards. Thank you. And then Professor Charles Lin from National Chao-Tung University from Taiwan. As I told you, he is the professor, but he did the vice mayor job in Tainan City. So he can give you some the balanced approach, how to deal with the innovation strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Charles Lin. I come from Taipei, and I will give you the themes of the formation and building of a creative special networks and an innovative ecosystem in Taipei. So you can see this is the specific focus on the city of Taipei, and using the terms creative special networks. You can see that the three parts in my presentation I want to show you, and I also want to discuss with you. One part is what is the mutual influence between the formation of the creative economies and the context of the urban development and how they have evolved by ways of the looking at the Taipei. And the second part of things I want to address the issue that how it is affected by the public policies and integrated industry and special features to develop a creative economy industry. It's become a chain in which innovation ecosystem will cluster and it interacted. Finally, I want to say what will be the next steps for the city of Taipei they are going to do. So you can see this is the outlines because the time quite limited. But the first part I want to show you to recognize the city of Taipei, what the status of it is. Well, starting from the Second World War II, the end of that, it became the capital city of Taiwan. And at that moment, the population of the Taipei is just less than 1 million. But right now, it 18 to the population scale, up to the 7 million, would be including the neighboring city altogether. But it becomes much more, it's not a matter of the population scale, it's the matter of the creativity in the city. So you can see this is starting the 1980s, the city facing the new critical point that is the city have to move itself for the industry change. It cannot be insisted on the manufacturing-oriented society, but it proclaims itself, it becomes of the post-industrialization of the city. So that would be much more important for the city for what he have done for the last 30 years. So you can see the city is always having the much more the creativity cluster, not only by the policy. Instead, it becomes it by itself. So you can see during the days, it's moving ahead from the manufacturing to the creative economy. What has been done is not only by the municipality, but somehow behind the thing, they also have some entrepreneurships. And in addition to that, also the national government driven try to put the capital city into the much more creatives. So it comes up the Taipei as a creative city. You can see the populations become to the 2.7, but adding to the neighboring altogether would be the 7 millions. But it also have been produced more than the 30% GDP of the national GDPs. And the foreign tourist is up to the 7 millions. So the status going this way, as the researcher and also as the former director of the planning agency in Taipei City, I am. So I'm doing the jobs that what is the outline of the creative spatial networks in Taipei. The research have been implemented and conducted for more than 2 years. So I will give you in addition to this, I also can say this is the spatial network will be related to the development process. Taking this one, for example, this is the OPARS, starting in the 1980. It's just the one single course, but the city also full of lots of the creativity. You can see the 24-hour city, convenience city in Taipei, and also thanks to the community buildings process that the citizens, they organize by themselves. So you can see they put lots of the energy and synergy by themselves to put them become much more creative. So in the same times, the city, starting from the 1990, putting lots of the metro development projects, as well as the putting the railroad. You can see the railroad, the line, from the west to the east, is consists of the 27 kilometers, putting the railroad undergrounded. So it becomes a much more potentiality that along the corridor, much more lands be released by the national government as well as the municipality to the market. But it's very good way that using the process that we can see, I try to outline. There were 3 types of the creative clusters in Taipei. I will show you. First one is you can see the green parts. There will be cannot be designed, but somehow it's kind of accumulations by the city life. So it's just kind of a CNC creative block, full of the gastronomy, music, literature, shopping, all thing all together. And the other thing is the creative corridors. Taking more than 20 years, the railroad underground is getting down, but at the same time, it putting us in the creative corridors. So this is the map. After 2 years conducting the research by myself and my research teams, I outlined that. You can see there will be the 3 parts. One is the green part, the other is the red corridor, and the third thing is you can see this is what I'm saying, the triangle. There were 2 triangles together in terms of the creative clusters. It's not only as a city of providing the service industry, but somehow one of the very special cases that within the city also have the very unique types of the technology part also within the city hubs. So it becomes that way. You can see again, I'm making this research. There were different functions in different spots, but they are interconnected. And furthermore, there will be some mapping from the startup entrepreneurs. You can see it become an engine. Most of the lots of the startup, they are concentrated in the belt. And further, there will be the triangle. It's quite interrelated because the different triangle taking technology part and a service hub and all financial center all together. The red parts percentage showing that this is the real connected by themselves. And it will be necessary to allow me to showing you there were my research that coming up there were 3 kinds of the governance strategies. and it will be divided into the three parts. One is special essentialism, the other is the mechanism that works, the third one will be the creative platforms. So as a municipality, as a city of Taipei, I'm going to say this is the very creative way. One thing is providing the smart infrastructures. The other thing is try to have some tools that by ways of the urban regenerations, providing the good networking for the creative special jobs. The third thing is the soft urbanism. The fourth thing is the adaptive zoning control. Without zoning, there will be nothing happen right there. But it will become much more restricted. But how can you provide a more creative quarters using the ways of adaptive zoning control in Taipei? And also, as so many speakers have mentioned, that this is it's very important university as the triggers to initiate knowledge and creative flows. That the Taipei city and the national government try to implement that some subsidy from the national and municipality funds to provide more cooperation driven by the university. And the 60 is the government should play the roles of the creative industry managers. And the seventh thing is the creative industry alliance become a third party, become a platform. And finally was urban curators. The urban curator means someone need to be play the role of a curator to make the theme all together and going on to the next steps. So it is the next steps that I showing you this is the city of Taipei moving on the next stage. They are focused on the strategic plans, using the strategic plan in terms of the creative special networkings, and they were moving ahead. And the most important weapon is the creative platforms and the creative quarters development agency. They are moving on. So that will allow me to go into my final remarks to you. There will be 4 points. One thing is that the development of a Taipei creative special networks and creative industry is responsible to the change of the specialities and the industry complexity. That would be because the city have to possess a long-term understanding of the characteristic of the territory identity. And the second thing is the facilitations of the connection of software infrastructure does matters. It's not only the way of the hardware, but the way of the softwares. And the third thing is a kind of a good cycles, patterns that the government creates platforms, and the platform create opportunities. And opportunity complete the development of industry clusters will form through the arrangement and establishment of the special and industry platforms. So the city will create a new image of itself. Finally, there will be the most important things. It's the government mechanism and the governance process. In Taipei, I can show you this is based on an open and transparent multi-stakeholders network platforms, which is the social atmosphere that encourages to develop a vision, develop discourses, allows and place importance of the local creativities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Lin. Very interesting presentation about the new technology into urban development. For example, Singapore, Malaysia, or Taiwan, Taipei, they have a new way how to apply the ICT development or the innovative high-tech development on the new market. This new market is urban development. Urban development contains the infrastructure and systems, green buildings, everything. So as you know, Taiwan has a very successful development of ICT technology, not only for the mobile phone, but also ubiquitous system. So Taipei City wanted to take implication of this technology into urban development as a new market. So he showed us the strategic planning and also how to merge into industrial development, technology, culture together. That is a kind of new approach of creative industry. So please give one more big hand for his previous effort. Please have a look at your watch. Today, I have done very successful to manage the speech. So we have about 30 minutes, enough time to debate it. So I will give the following order. The first one, I will let the speaker and panelists to struggle each other. So I can give them 3 minutes to challenge, to attack other panelists or speakers, each others. You can enjoy this serious debate at one hand, the first. Second, today we have a very interesting combination of the speech. For example, Fred Young Phillips and I have a paper on the innovation ecosystem theory, how to apply in the real innovation community into a Korean case. That is a very conceptual approach. Then two speakers, the Professor Narasimhalu and Professor Park, did their presentation on the innovative business development, how successful the startup facilitate their growth, how to let them work together, networking or something like that. That is real, the business orientation approach. And then other two the speakers contact with the urban development dimension. The Professor Pietsch was talking about the green city development in accordance with climate change. But he suggests that must be integrated with green business. So the urban development dimension, he talked, and also Professor Lin, again, about this into a creative city development. So two groups. So I will invite two groups of questioner. The one group for the Narasimhalu and Professor Park, I will invite Broshula, and also Malcolm Perry from the UK. Two gentlemen will attack you in terms of business orientation. And then in terms of urban development or climate change concern, I will invite Professor Grun. He gone away. He's here. So I will invite Professor Grun from Dortmund, and also I will invite President Richard Weber. You have a big interest on the climate change. So please join this discussion. So the second round, 2 and 2 questions could be attacked to this group. Then they can respond it. Second round. Third round, anybody will join this discussion as a whole. Agreed? Okay. Then let you attack other 4 panelists. Okay.
No. Far from attacking, I want to express appreciation. Dr. O was bending my ear during much of Desai's talk, so I missed most of it, but, and sorry, Desai, but you know, Singapore has obviously been a role model for many of our Technopolis efforts for a long, long time, and we don't want to ignore anything that's happening in Singapore, particularly Desai's good efforts. As a multicultural center of innovation, it's got a lot of things in common with Silicon Valley. And you may be aware of the new Argonauts phenomenon, where people with ethnic or family ties across the seas are starting companies with one office in Silicon Valley and one office in India or wherever. And and what Professor Park is describing as classic leadership behavior, which is to notice that a parade is forming and jump out in front of it, and go out and try to encourage that the people with multinational ties, well, it would develop the multinational ties or strengthen them by locating an office of their company in Silicon Valley. So that's absolutely great. And I very much appreciated Professor Pietsch's talk because I've always thought that cities are the original open innovation projects. It's not a new concept. Cities have been doing this for thousands of years now, and with the infrastructure evolving to suit the new social arrangements that people make when they're crowded together. Now, Professor Pietsch emphasized the interface between the business system and the natural ecosystem, and that really set off thoughts for me that that maybe we should even consider reserving the term business ecosystem for that interface between the artificial and the natural features in the green city. So that will definitely bear some further thoughts. And then Professor Lin talked about innovation in the city. And I think of previous talks I've given at the WTA events where I argued that things were happening in Daejeon and Hsinchu and not in Seoul and Taipei because the dominant city in a country is often the stronghold of the conservative values of that society, and that innovative and oddball behavior is more likely to be tolerated in Daejeon and Hsinchu than it would be in the biggest cities. The dominant cities are now responding by establishing these innovation districts. That also allows the quick communication between the actors in the ecosystem, because the other virtue of Daejeon and Hsinchu was that you could find any knowledge you needed with traveling less than a half hour, which is not true in the bigger cities. But if you concentrate innovation hub districts, then it is possible, and the only problem is the other population of the city resenting the gentrification of these districts and the driving out of the original population. Okay. Thank you.
Fred is too generous. It's not attack. It's a good comment. I will attack you. The Singapore
Oh, yeah. Please attack.
has
That's
not
all I
the
was going to say.
critical mass.
I have nothing to attack. I'm happy to be attacked.
And you have a very nice approach to facilitate the innovation based on the university's younger generation. But in Singapore, I think you have limited size or critical mass to spread it. What is your policy to link together with neighboring countries or for the global market? That is my question to add to the Fred.
What people may not know, that Singapore artificially drove up the price of doing business in Singapore so that they can move the low-cost manufacturing out. But they didn't really lose control of the manufacturing because they actually leased islands from Indonesia. It's called Batam and Bintan. And they moved the low-cost manufacturing to these islands. They developed this, I don't know, maybe a 99-year lease or 999-year lease or something like that, so that the Singapore companies can still manufacture, but in a different place, using low-cost labor from those countries. Similarly, you find that many of the Singapore companies utilize the lower part of Malaysia, which is really, what do you call it? I forget the name, it will come to me. Again, many of them are located there trying to make use of low-cost labor as well as low cost of doing business. So in a sense, they have integrated themselves into the neighboring countries in whatever way was possible, within whatever frameworks that the countries would offer to work with them. But Singapore still is a very small city. I didn't want to show Singapore up there because it will be very difficult to show in the map because it will be invisible. It's about 660 square kilometers and about 5.47 million people. When you look at it, eventually the government is very clear that they have to move the population from, they did that from manufacturing economy to pretty much the knowledge economy, and they want to move them from the knowledge economy to the innovation economy or the creative economy. So that's why they're putting in place a lot of programs which will transition the population from one stage to another. That is likely to have some social consequences. Some people may not be able to make the transition, and how do you manage them? these are again the government, I'm sure, is thinking about it.
Have we any question to?
No, I have no questions. I like to be attacked.
Yeah, as I told you in my presentation, the Silicon Valley innovation ecosystem evolved for 60 years, and then many countries tried to copy Silicon Valley, but most of them, I would say, couldn't. There are some of the reasons. I talked about some fundamental reasons why those attempts to copy Silicon Valley failed, or maybe not completely successfully copied. So the Silicon Valley has a unique environment ecosystem. So all those factors I discussed in my presentation should be highly integrated, combined together. So that's my point for the innovation ecosystem. Yeah.
And then Dr. Broschler and Dr. Perry, have you already prepared a attacking question to both of them? I will invite you, Dr. Broschler.
Okay, it's hard to attack, but I attack all of you, okay? So I think what is the biggest problem is we all know that you cannot copy Silicon Valley. That is a fact. I think you can just not copy it because it works in Silicon Valley. And what is totally missing when we have such an approach, presenting something, it works because it works in this, name it, ecosystem. But the cleverness is in the detail to translate working models into the regional context. And this is a bit missing. It is only within the first presentation, because the first presentation is making a definition that each of the country or region needs to translate into the context. And this needs to be evaluated. So the loop must be taking all these examples and having a kind of a cherry picking out of this, which is applicable, and then get it validated by those ones who properly managed to have a running, well-functioning ecosystem. Yeah, that would be my approach to these good examples. They are good, but I think you cannot copy them. You play the role of a technology follower. You invest a lot of money, but the return on invest will not come because the time has changed. So they always run behind. And there is a big risk that you lose the momentum to do the right thing. You don't jump on a technology that is already in the market and where the S-curve is almost at the end. What you do is you develop the next S-curve. So we have to be very careful that all these countries that are developing countries not trying to copy Silicon Valley. It is rubbish. It doesn't work. So we have to make exactly the right thing, that we offer them the opportunity to translate into the new things. And this was partly in with all the discussions that were going into the next generation of using of in the green cities, for example. Yeah, we know that the resources will be gone. So how do they handle the problem of resources? If you would copy the Silicon Valley model, I'm not sure if it would work if we have to integrate the model of the green cities. Yeah, and there are a lot of things if we talk about smart cities. What are you doing with a developing country? Just.
You want me to respond? Or? Okay.
Well, thank you for the opportunity of asking a question. If we're adopting these terms about ecosystems, links, green cities, then we'll need to put metrics on them to be sure that they're serving our ambitions. How would you suggest we measure performance to prove we're doing the right thing in the right place?
My question is actually addressable to any member of the panel, but in particular, I'm interested in Dr. Narasimhalu's reaction, and that is with respect to climate change. We have seen what the consequences of a disastrous typhoon does with respect to the careful planning for Japanese nuclear power generation. What part of the process in putting together these clusters should take into account the vulnerability of the location of all of these wonderful clusters as a result of the changing realities of our planet's climate, both in terms of hardening sites, in terms of the calculus of risk, about the denial of certain types of activities to certain areas close to potential catastrophe, and how should that be embedded within the decision-making process?
Okay, the three suggested questionnaires given to you. So if you do respond it, you can do.
Okay.
And then
Okay. Let me take Raymond's suggestion. I believe that nobody should copy Silicon Valley because Silicon Valley has its own dynamics, and there are very few other places which correspond to Silicon Valley. It doesn't have all the elements there, so you have to find your own local solutions. In the case of Singapore, they're very clear. They identified 3 areas which they thought are very important to them. One was healthcare. Second was really clean tech because they are very dependent on neighbors for water, etc. And the third one they said was going to be interactive digital media because they felt that's an area which they can do with very low investment. So this is a fairly well thought through strategy, and they said, let us focus on these 3. At the same time, they want a balanced approach. They don't want everything to be top down, so they said we also will keep our ears open to people bottom up. If they come up with something interesting and revolutionary, we will support them as well. So in that sense, we are in agreement. We are not in disagreement. So that's what I would say. Now, responding to the metrics for how these pan out, etc. In my opinion, there are probably 2 metrics that I would recommend whatever you do. One is clearly job creation, second, the economic outcome. These 2 are certainly linked, but not exactly one-to-one linked, because you can have the same number of people working in 2 different countries, producing 2 different impacts on GDP. So I would link these 2 so that you're able to slowly progress your population and employee base from low value-added services or low value-added whatever processes to those opportunities which are much higher value-added, and moving them is not very easy. Singapore spends a lot of money on retraining people. They pour a lot of money on getting people to say, okay, we think that this is an area that's likely to become obsolete. Here is a new opportunity. We give you money. Up to 90% of training costs are reimbursed. Even then, you find there are going to be some part of the population which doesn't take that bite, which doesn't want to move. They say, I'm too old, I cannot make the transition. And this part of the population is something that we need to worry about. Metrics, I would say, certainly, again, repeat, number of jobs created and the GDP growth. Without harming the environment, and all those other caveats certainly will apply. The third question about Singapore is a small island. If there is really any major disasters, will be affected very easily. I forget what is the average height, maybe 1.43 meters or something from mean sea level. So I forget, it may not be accurate, but we are very vulnerable. If you talk about the Fukushima as an example, nuclear reactor, see the reality is you have to look at any event, the probability of the event, and the impact of the event. When the impact of that event is going to be highly, highly impactful on your nation or a section of your population, no matter how small the probability is, you have to make that extra effort to protect yourself. The question is, yes, they had walls. I forget what the number was. They were anticipating 10-meter waves or whatever. Would it have helped, for example, if they had thought about higher than 10-meter waves, however small that probability might be, given the impact, if the impact is going to be so high, it is worthwhile spending a few tens of millions of dollars preparing for something that may be very small probability but very high impact. That's how I would respond to you.
I just add to that maybe we can say hardware oriented innovation system, and then software oriented innovation system, and then one of said how the country try to copy Silicon Valley, and then what's the speed. So I saw China and then Korea, other countries try to install hardware-oriented innovation system quickly, and then I could see a lot of hardware-oriented buildings, and then information technology structure, all those. Silicon Valley actually didn't, start like that. So so you have to balance software innovation system, hardware innovation system. Which one should come first? Which one next? So it's just sort of a policy decision. However, I would say you have to balance to good the system.
Okay. And Professor Pietsch and Professor Lin, I add one more question. Green business could be an alternative industry for the next generation. With understanding of current situation, it takes too much, pay too much to prepare this green infrastructure to sustain the city development. So as a planner, you can suggest it, but it must be calculated in terms of economic things or job creation. You can add something about the green business efficiency for the next generation industry or business as a whole.
Okay. First, I have to say some aspects about ecosystems. Ecosystem is a term most of you will think about wilderness, good nature, and something else. But nature can also be very bad. And when we look for different types of green ecosystems, also gardening or agriculture is a form of ecosystem managing. And for such examples, we have also to manage innovation ecosystems. They come not from the sky. You have something like a pioneer stage, a growth stage, and you want to have long climax stage for these ecosystems. But you need a kind of cultivation to get the right ecosystem. And in these days, I've heard a lot of innovation ecosystems, but nearly nothing how we can cultivate them in different economies, different cultures all over the world. I think we have to look for some ecosystem cultivators who are able to manage and develop such innovation ecosystems. if we don't do that, innovation ecosystem is an empty metaphor.
Lin?
Well, I want to respond to issues that what is the difference between the innovation ecosystems and what I mean is the creative spatial networking. I ask you, I'm so surprised that because I received the invitation from the WTA, giving the themes that in this panel we're going to talking about the innovation ecosystems. It's a new word to me. Okay, so I ask you, what is the difference between the I mentioned because this presentation I conduct more than 2 years, studying I using the words of the creative spatial networking in some special territory. It's much easier for me to recognize that what is being tested and all be testified by the local citizen or by the municipality, which part is the creative quarters. But it's not only the quarter, it's the networking. It's much easier for me. So to me, it's a new word, innovation ecosystem. To me, it's kind of a metaphor. It's also in the middle of the tangible and the intangible way. In terms of the local governors, in terms of the urban developments, it is not possible for the governors to catch in or making the better of the innovation ecosystems. But somehow it becomes, surprised me, it could be much more urgent issues or agenda that if one to push the more creative networking of the speciality in the urban territory, yeah, you should have the managing the better ecosystem of the innovations. So I didn't get the answers, but to me, it's a new word, and also in the middle of the tangible and intangible. And it is quite a new mission for any municipality to manage that. But I don't know how. But I don't know really how. And this is why I mentioned the 3 categories. I proposed the strategies for the city governments that you should do this, you should do this. It's a shopping list. And it also comes from what they have done. So I recommend they have 3 categories. One is the essentialism of the speciality. The other is the networking. The third thing is platforms. So this is try to add in what I have mentioned to you. And I also asking you, what is the notion of the innovation ecosystem? The second thing I want to address is the moderator, the chairman mentioned it here. I'm quite interested in the Hamburg and also the so many cities, even though we can see the building under a small city. You know? I'm so wondering what is the next steps for the smart and green city, and how much we should put into our investment in terms of the making the city more smart and green, and how can it make the commercialization in terms of the you put lots of investment. You should get something from that. Well, people's well-being will be one of the harvest, but it's still unbalanced. So I'm still wondering how could we move the urban developments into more smart. So this is I'm not providing the solution, but I'm providing the question again. Thank you.
Thank you. And okay, the conception of innovation ecosystem. And in conclusion, Fred gave the conclusion. The innovation ecosystem notion has virtues, has helped development projects across the world, but you conclude, but it does not offer due scientific truth or reliable method for knowledge and economic development. You can add something about this conception.
Actually, I wanted to answer the questions or offer some answers to the questions of Raymond and Malcolm. Yeah, thank you, Raymond, for that reminder about regional variation. There we can learn something from the biological ecosystems because, you know, no one would try to farm crops in Saudi Arabia the same way they do in Germany. Obviously, different. But having said that, even though the ecosystems of the Arabian Desert and the northern European forest are somewhat linked by the ocean currents and the air currents and all this, the regional ecosystems are much more, around the world, are much more firmly linked with each other. And Professor Park's example shows that. The fact that we're all together in this room today shows that there's a stronger connection between the regions and exchange of knowledge and so on. In my workshops, I always tell people, forget Silicon Valley. You're not going to be like Silicon Valley. But the trick is to find another Technopolis initiative that you admire, that you think you can be like them in the next 3 to 5 years, and then map out all the things about that role model that you would like to emulate, and map out how you can get from here to there. And that's a much more constructive way of going about it than to go to bed every night dreaming of Silicon Valley. And Malcolm? Malcolm asked about metrics. There are some well-established ways of, multi-constituent dialogue-based, well, not necessarily reaching consensus, but at least getting to a decision. And if it's a decision about what to measure, sometimes the outcome of that dialogue process will just decide to measure a couple of contradictory things. And these urban decision-making dialogue methods, they're particularly advanced in the UK, as a matter of fact, because I see lots of papers submitted to technological forecasting and social change that deal with this kind of, we're going to adopt X technology in the city and it's going to affect this population in this way and that population in the other way, and they have skilled facilitators get the groups together and talk to each other, and something good comes out. So it's possible you can find these methods in the journals.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. We have still 5 minutes, so I will invite 2 potential attackers to challenge the Singapore successful innovation strategy. And we have 2 Malaysian experts. They have a good idea of what happened, what kind of advantage, disadvantage in conjunction with Singapore innovation community. So I'll invite Professor Mohan and General Secretary of VITRO. Both are working in Malaysia. Please have a talk with Singapore.
Good afternoon. 4 ecosystems and the concepts. I'd like to reiterate Fred Phillips' question. Social impacts of these high-tech regions or clusters within cities, whether it's Singapore or Taipei, what happens to ordinary people who are not part of this high-tech development?
Professor O, I think the best question should be actually directed to our CEO of MITE, who is from Malaysia, and he has given a very good paper this morning, and I think that is a very good question to actually direct to him. He will have a good scenario of the whole of Malaysia.
This morning, Dr. Suleiman joined the 3rd plenary session. He talked about the possible networking with the Singapore region in urban conservation. Then he will talk how to make the best use of locational advantage in Singapore. So that is a win-win policy. Therefore, I ask the Malaysian colleague. Many countries complain of their neighboring country because the strong locational advantage and the innovative capacity, we lose our market. That is the conclusion, but it's not. The network entrepreneurship is the first priority for them first to go. So Malaysian approach in the near future with Singapore is the best policy to work together. We have a time to close it.
You want me to respond to Mohan? Or?
Mohan, yes, you will do.
Okay. Yeah, I did. Social impacts, not just Singapore, but any country that's evolving its economy, there is always bound to be a section of people who have to be taken care of because they are unable to make the transition. And the government has to reach out and they have to make sure that these people are not forgotten. They have to be given opportunities that match their skill set if they don't want to make the transition. And that's not particular to Singapore alone. I'm sure that it's true of any other nation. Yeah, that's what I would say. Second, in terms of resources, Malaysia is a very fertile country, very rich in natural resources. I don't think they have to really get envious of Singapore because they have so much more resources that they can leverage and create their own innovations around their own resources. So that's not a problem at all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Then I will have closing remarks. My colleague from UNESCO, the Professor Yosla Nur, he talked to me his initial experience when he dealt with innovation policy or science park development. When he was invited by the one particular less developed country, he was requested to do advice, a consultant job for the science park. When he be there, it's not a science park, it is a science museum. So the conception for the people is quite different. In my country, it's the same. When I did the first project of science park in Korea, it's end of 70s. Many people were confused between the industrial park or high-tech industrial estate and science park. So they thought when they let the high-tech industry located in one location or territory, that is a science park. Many people have that idea, but that's not. That's not. To be a science park, we need indigenous development base, the university, innovative actors, and also the good system to facilitate it. So today we are here to talk about the innovation ecosystem. But the problem is, innovation sounds very complicated. Nobody knows what is innovation. Secondly, ecosystem, we could not compare with the natural ecosystem with this innovation ecosystem. So complicated. So many people talk the innovation ecosystem, but they have little understanding about it. At least, why we have a good understanding about the innovation ecosystem? All of the panelists talk about the Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley could survive just one in that kind of environment. They harmonize with the previous environment and conditions. So they develop their own system to challenge for the innovation. Sometimes they met some crisis, but they transform it. That's something like living people or living creatures were going. So we need to establish that kind of ecosystem related high-tech industry. Some countries need to facilitate university spin-offs or startups. Some countries need to support the business initiative. They have different kind of environment, but they need to prepare this ecosystem to challenge for the innovation, high-tech corridor or something. Therefore, this ecosystem is fundamentally important for us to do. So today, we are doing the beginning of our debate. We can go through. Then next global forum, we can have a little developed conception of innovation ecosystem in the near future. Thank you so much. Thank you.
여러분들의 열정적인 참여와 토론으로 2014 대전 세계 혁신 포럼과 제4회 이노비즈 글로벌 포럼을 위해 준비된 4개의 플래너리 세션을 모두 성공적으로 끝마칠 수 있었습니다. 이제 뜨거운 박수와 함께 마지막 플래너리 세션을 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your active participation in discussion. We could finish all the plenary sessions in a great success. Let's wrap up the last plenary session with a big round of applause. Thank you very much.